study, 2016, but it's multiple studies. The most recent one that I've seen was 2016, that show that many people say they move away from religion because of science. They move away from religion because they believe, they're taught that you have to choose between the two. And for many people, not all, and it's frustrating because for others, it's the exact opposite. But for many people, if they have to choose between religion and science, they just move away from the congregations that they perhaps were brought up in. That can't be good for religion. The second thing that's even bigger is once you get outside of congregations, religion is understood by many to be represented by its most extreme forms. So when we see people and congregations, as Alan said, the Reverend Jeffers, who has said he's not going to listen to the World Health Organization because his God tells him that we don't need science. Science is in conflict. People who are neutral, who might be neutral to religion, see that loud voice as being what religion is all about. Those are the voices, those are the extreme voices, unfortunately. A misunderstanding of what religion is. So when religion is seen as something that is that extreme, those of us that are far more moderate than that are discounted. We need to move past that and demonstrate that those extreme voices are not representative of who we are and what we're about. Okay, religion, the conflict, the supposed conflict between science and religion is also doing great damage to science. The supposed conflict between religion and science began, I think it's fair to say, with Charles Darwin. At least that's what people like to believe, with his view on evolution, that religion and science come into conflict. If you believe in evolution, you can't have a belief in a God-created universe, or a universe that is created beyond our boundaries if you believe in science. The great population geneticist in 1973 Theodosius Dobzhansky wrote an article entitled, "Nothing in Biology Makes Sense Except in the Light of Evolution." If you take away evolution, you have nothing left in biology. It's damaging to one facet of science as can be. I'm a biologist, I'm an evolutionary biologist, so I care if my field is diminished completely. However, that's not the main problem that religion does to science when religion doesn't accept the confluence of the two. Turning away from the methodology of science, which is what so many of the louder voices, but not so many of the real voices of religious adherents tell us. When we turn away from the methodology of science, what we are doing is turning away from in many ways, the Enlightenment itself. We don't have a way of understanding the world in a repeatable way, in a way that leads us to understand its workings better than just saying, I believe. There's a difference between belief and understanding. Now, what I want to do with the bulk of my time today is talk about an example of how we can see religion and science coming together. What I want to do is talk about the organization that Alan mentioned that I founded and I currently direct, an organization called the Clergy Letter Project. The Clergy Letter Project was originally designed to show religious support for evolution. As I said, Theodosius Dobzhansky said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, especially in the States, but not exclusively in the States. Evolution had been largely removed from biology teaching in middle school and in high schools. And what was left was simply a recitation of supposed facts with nothing binding it all together. And biology teachers, scientists, science educators more broadly understood that really was a meaningless exercise. And more than that, it gave students the idea that anything you wanted to believe was acceptable in science, in the science classroom. So we needed to try to change the way science was taught if we were going to change the way science was understood in our society at large. What I learned very early on in my career as a scientist was that when school boards became, excuse me, when school boards started moving in the direction of limiting what could be taught in the science classroom, some people wanted to push back, but the way you push back made a huge difference in terms of the success you might have. For instance, I was asked to come to many school board meetings. I was living in Ohio at the time. I was asked to come to many school board meetings as a professional biologist in many towns and communities around the state of Ohio and beyond. And in almost every case, I convinced these people they didn't want me to come. They didn't want me to come and talk. They didn't want me to make a presentation about how important science was for their community. And they were surprised because they had read some of my work and they thought I was they were wrong about this, but they thought I was a reasonable speaker and it was valuable to hear my voice and to present that voice to school board members. What I, in every case, convinced them that there were people who were far more important and whose voices would make a bigger difference than mine. And they said, well, who are those people? And I said, I don't know who they are, but you know who they are. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, there have to be two things about those people that would be really important for your school board to hear. First, they had to be local. They had to be people who are part of that community. They don't want those school board members like me coming in and telling them what to do. It needed to be somebody who was part of the community. And they said, yeah, that makes sense, somebody they know. I said, exactly. They said, well, can you recommend a scientist locally who can speak on behalf of science? And I said, sure, I can do that, but you don't want those people either. They said, what do you mean? And I said, you want a religious leader. They said, well, we're talking about science. I said, no, you're talking about religion. You're talking about how religion is beginning to try to take over a piece of science and how the religion that these school board members are promoting is not your religion, that it's a narrower subset of religion. And therefore you want people to come who are deeply committed to religion, deeply rooted in the local community, and who can say with great conviction and passion and demonstrate with a firsthand knowledge how what these school board members are trying to do, not only in their belief isn't a full and complete view of religion, but it runs counter to the religion that these people are trying to promote on Sundays and Saturdays in their congregations. And people began to understand that local voices and religious voices were the best sponsors and spokespeople for science as there could be. In every case, that's who they talk to their school board, and in almost every case, school boards recognized the dangers of what they were doing and backed away. So the Clergy Letter Project began with a focus on evolution. As I will show you in a couple of minutes, it goes beyond that, but that's where it began. A second. Okay. The Clergy Letter Project began with a simple letter, a 2-paragraph letter written by a friend of mine who was a clergy member of the United Church of Christ. And what this letter said was, it just explained how religion and science can be compatible, and it urged school board members all across the United States. And we were focused on the United States. We didn't get into Canada, we didn't get into the rest of the world at that point. We were focused on school boards in the United States, and it focused on how the teaching of evolution is so central to biology, and it posed no threat to those who believed in religion deeply. Very quickly, we gathered hundreds and thousands of signatures of religious leaders, Christian clergy members. But just as quickly, others began to want to get involved. We had rabbis who said, I can't sign this letter. It says it's from Christian clergy. I'm not a Christian clergy member, but I certainly believe how important evolution is and how congruent it is with my religion. And we ended up with a rabbi creating a rabbi letter. For me personally, the most difficult group were Unitarians. Unitarians like to argue. Unitarians like to talk. Unitarians like to have a different perspective, or even if it's the same perspective, they want that perspective heard in their voice. And Unitarian ministers kept coming to me and saying, wow, I love this Christian clergy letter. And some of them, in fact, considered themselves to be Christian as well, and they signed on. But many of them said, I love what's here, but I want my voice. I want my Unitarian voice to be here. Can't you come up with something that we as Unitarians could sign? And I said, no, I can't, because I'm not a Unitarian minister, but you could. And after speaking to hundreds of Unitarian ministers, we finally they finally developed a Unitarian Universalist clergy letter that now exists. And then we moved into a Buddhist clergy letter and a humanist clergy letter. Now, all of these clergy letters, not for parochial reasons, for political reasons, are signed just by clergy members working in the United States. We currently have over 17,000 clergy members working in the United States who have signed on to these things, including 685 Unitarian ministers as of today. Clergy members wanted to do more, though, and what we ended up doing is creating an event like the event we're doing now, where, as Alan said, once a year, typically on the birthday of Charles Darwin, February 12th, 1809, on the anniversary of that birthday, congregations all over the world, and we welcome congregations from all over the world, did something to promote the idea that religion and science can work together comfortably. I believe this is our 16th year of doing this, and so far we have reached over 1 million people in congregations directly, through services, through talks, through discussions, through workshops, through any number of things, and through reports in media about those events. We've reached many, many millions more. And what that does is provide a counterpoint to those loud voices like Jeffers who say, religion and science, I have to choose, and I'm going to choose religion. What we're saying is that's a false dichotomy. You don't have to choose. Science and religion are, in fact, not in conflict. Let me very quickly say that science was founded on the naturalism. What methodological naturalism says is that science looks at the natural world and says the only explanations that are available to a scientific investigation are naturalistic ones. That is, we can't go beyond the natural world. There can't be another force that we can investigate via science. That doesn't say that there is not another force, just saying that that other spirituality, that other force, that other being, if such a thing exists, is outside the realm of science. Methodological naturalism is can be compared to, it's distinct from, if you will, the concept of philosophical naturalism, where philosophical naturalism says, indeed, there can be something beyond the natural world. That thing that is beyond the natural world can be very important to all of us, but it's outside of the realm of science. Science only looks at methodological naturalism. Many scientists, well, let me do it this way. All scientists, I think it's fair to say, are methodological naturalists. Some scientists are also philosophical naturalists. And what that says is you can hold multiple views in your mind at the same time, except at some point you have to make some choices. Let me turn to the Dalai Lama for a second, because in what he has said, which is so, for me, so very moving, he has said, and we use this as the introduction to our Buddhist clergy letter, he says, if scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept and abandon those claims or adopt them as metaphor. What they're saying is science and religion aren't in conflict, but they help shape one another. And there's nothing wrong with it bringing into your religion a sense of metaphor. And that's what good religions, meaningful religions, religions that look beyond their own boundaries for knowledge and incorporate that broader knowledge into themselves do. Let me turn for a second, since that's the Buddhist clergy letter, let me turn to the UU clergy letter for a second and read just the end of the second paragraph and the end of the third paragraph of what the UU clergy letter says. And remember, the UU clergy letter started by focusing on the importance of evolution. The UU clergy letter says, we believe that religious truth is of a different order from scientific truth. Its purpose is not to convey scientific information, but to transform hearts. We urge school board members to preserve the integrity of the science curriculum by affirming the teaching of the theory of evolution as a core component of human knowledge. We ask that science remain science and that religion remain religion, two very different but complementary forms of truth. Now, what that is doing is demonstrating the deep confluence of what religion can be about and what science can be about, and how closely they can come together. What members of the Clergy Letter Project very quickly discovered, or came to the joint realization, because individuals held this belief deeply, but they realized beyond their individual beliefs, is that science and religion come together in so many more ways than just by looking at evolution. The Clergy Letter Project, the members of the Clergy Letter Project, the clergy who are the Clergy Letter Project, have taken a number of really important stances over the years because they believe religion and science teaches them the same thing. They've taken stances against Islamophobia. They've taken stances against, they've staked out a position and gone public against homophobia, against racism. They've officially sponsored the March for Science. They've officially sponsored the People's Climate March. They've taken a very strong position and written forcefully about being in opposition to the US federal policy of separating immigrant children from their families. They've taken a very strong position in caring for the natural world, and understanding that we are the guardians of the natural world and we have an obligation to care for that. Our latest effort in terms of understanding that religion and science can come together has led the Clergy Letter Project to create something we've called the Climate Crisis Letter, which explains how the climate crisis that's before us has a huge impact on the world that we have come to know and to cherish and have an obligation to care for, how the climate crisis is going to disproportionately, although it will affect all of us deeply, it will disproportionately affect the poor among us and the displaced among us, and it will displace many more because of what's going on. The Climate Crisis Letter has, as of this morning, has been signed by 950 clergy members representing 13 countries around the world. The Clergy Letter Project has taken a position about the COVID-19 pandemic, very different from what Jeffers has said. Members of the Clergy Letter Project have made it very clear that they're going to listen to the World Health Organization. They're going to listen to the best scientists and epidemiologists and doctors, and going to listen to the words and advice that they have. Members of the Clergy Letter Project were among the earliest to close down face-to-face meetings and to open up again only when they felt they could do it safely. And many that have opened have now gone back to Zoom, either partially or fully, because they recognize that caring for each other and caring for our communities means taking care of what the scientists have had to say, and to be very careful about how we communicate, how we share, how we work together. And caring together means maybe not hugging directly, but hugging virtually and being a part of each other's community in a way that we couldn't before. Moving to a virtual reality has meant, in some senses, expanding our communities. And frankly, I wouldn't be here with you. I wouldn't get to know what you're doing if we hadn't moved to Zoom. And I would never begin to say that Zoom is every bit as important and every bit as good as being in the same room and sharing something to eat and sharing something to drink and looking directly into each other's eyes. But we can celebrate what Zoom can bring to us, and we can make the best of the situation we're in. And as we move, hopefully soon, beyond being apart, we can recognize that we can be together in a different sort of way. So what does all this mean in a bigger sense? It means, unfortunately, but unfortunately not just in the United States, we're living in what I fear I have to call a post-factual world where science is under attack. We live in a society that's being fragmented along religious, class, racial, and ethnic lines. We live in a world that for some is a post-religious world. We are living in a world where religion and science together can address and should address some of these issues. We're living in a world, or we should live in a world, where religious leaders and scientists share and can share and have an obligation to share a single message, a message that carries a great deal more weight than when each of us talk separately about it. It's that message that religion and science can look to the world and learn more about it by using the methodology of both. It's looking to the world in the light of the 7 principles of Unitarianism, especially those 4 that I talked about, recognizing that all of us are part of a single community. We know that we're part of a single community, a single species biologically, and we certainly know that we are part of a shared humanity by what Unitarianism tells us. We know that we are better when we search for truth and meaning and recognize the differences that we share when we look for that truth and meaning. And we can celebrate the truth and meaning that you find and recognize and argue about the truth and meaning that I find and ask, how do they differ? But how do they come together? And how can we respect each other and disagree civilly, but come to bring those 2 understandings, your understanding and my understanding, to something that's a combined understanding and it's even greater than that. And together, when we can do all of that, when we can build a better world and a greener world and move past the pandemic and move past the problems associated with global warming, we can create a world that is more just and more equal and more compassionate. We will create a world that is more in keeping with what Unitarianism believes, what I believe all religions believe, and what science strives for as well. So with that, let me, excuse me, let me conclude simply by thanking you for allowing me to share these 20 minutes or 24 minutes with you in your homes and in your congregation, and more importantly, in your hearts. It means a great deal to me to be able to talk to you, and I trust that this time has given us the opportunity to think about not why do we need to talk to each other about this, because we share these beliefs in the compatibility of religion and science, but what can we do to take that that understanding one step further and reach out to those who don't believe, not try to convert them to our religious beliefs, but try to convert them to having civil discourse and to begin to understand that there are deeper, more meaningful ways to understand the world. And those deeper, more meaningful ways of understanding the world combine religion and science together in a way that brings us to a place that we are not when we're there alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for getting up early this morning to join us and let us know more about Clergy Letter Project. Congratulations on starting the Clergy Letter Project all those years ago. It's been wonderful to be a part of it, and just to see how it has grown over the years. I must admit, I wasn't really aware that Unitarians had our separate clergy letter, so we'll have to check that out. Everyone in the room was smiling when you said that Unitarians were a little bit difficult coming on board, and that kind of fits in with who we are. We always like to question. So thank you so much.